Listen, there's a moment in every betrayal when you realize that the person screwing you over has been planning it longer than you've been trusting them. That moment came for me on a Thursday afternoon in March, standing in our conference room watching my boss accept congratulations for my work while I held a $50 Amazon gift card like some kind of participation trophy. My name is Lysander Cross, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the best way to destroy someone is to simply stop protecting them from their own incompetence. Dataflow Systems was a mid-sized software company hanging on by its fingernails when I joined as a senior sales representative 3 years ago. The industry was consolidating, bigger players were eating smaller ones, and we were bleeding clients to competitors who could offer enterprise-level solutions we couldn't match. My boss, Caspian Thorne, was a kind of sales director who managed through intimidation and took credit for other people's wins while blaming them for any losses. He'd built his reputation on aggressive tactics that worked in the short term but destroyed relationships over time. By the time I arrived, Dataflow's reputation in the industry was mediocre at best. But I had something Caspian didn't: patience and the ability to build genuine relationships with clients who valued long-term partnerships over flashy presentations. The Morrison Industries opportunity came to our attention in July of last year. They were a manufacturing giant looking to overhaul their entire data management system, a potential $3 million contract that would represent 30% of our annual revenue. It was exactly the kind of transformational deal that could stabilize our company for years. Caspian assigned the account to me after his initial pitch meeting went poorly. Morrison CTO, Elena Rodriguez, had made it clear that they weren't interested in high-pressure sales tactics or cookie-cutter solutions. They wanted a partner who understood their specific challenges and could deliver customized value. "Work your relationship-building magic, Lysander," Caspian told me with his practiced smile. "But remember, this is a team effort. I'll be staying closely involved to ensure we present a unified strategy." Translation: I'd do the work. He'd swoop in to take credit if it succeeded. I spent the next 8 months cultivating the Morrison relationship with methodical precision. Weekly check-ins with Elena and her team. Site visits to understand their manufacturing processes. Custom presentations that address their specific pain points rather than generic software benefits. The breakthrough came when I realized Morrison's real problem wasn't their data management system. It was the way different departments hoarded information instead of sharing it. Their software worked fine. Their corporate culture was broken. Instead of selling them new software, I proposed a comprehensive integration strategy that would maximize their existing investments while adding targeted Dataflow solutions only where they filled genuine gaps. It was less revenue up front, but it solved their actual problem and positioned us as strategic advisors rather than vendors. Elena loved the approach. Over 6 months of regular meetings, I built relationships not just with the IT department, but with operations managers, floor supervisors, and executives who would actually use whatever system we implemented. Caspian's involvement during this period was minimal but supervisory. He'd attend the major milestone meetings, ask a few questions to demonstrate engagement, and then disappear until the next scheduled check-in. I kept him informed through detailed reports, and he seemed satisfied with my progress. The closing presentation in February was my masterpiece. 8 months of research, relationship building, and strategic thinking condensed into a 90-minute proposal that addressed every concern Morrison had raised and several they hadn't thought of yet. Elena and her team asked tough questions for 2 hours after the presentation. Not skeptical questions, but implementation questions, the kind that meant they were already mentally committed and working through logistics. "Lysander," Elena said as the meeting wrapped up, "this is exactly what we've been looking for. Someone who actually understands our business instead of just trying to sell us software." The contract signature happened 3 weeks later. $3.2 million over 18 months, with options for expansion that could double the value if the initial implementation succeeded. It was the biggest deal in Dataflow's history, larger than our previous 3 biggest contracts combined. I called Caspian from Morrison's parking lot after Elena signed the papers. "It's done," I told him. "Full contract, 18-month timeline, $3.2 million total value." "Outstanding work, Lysander," he said, and I could hear the excitement he was trying to contain. "This is going to change everything for Dataflow. I'll set up a company meeting for tomorrow to announce the win." The company meeting was where I first realized how completely I'd been set up. Caspian stood at the front of our conference room. Our entire 30-person staff gathered to hear about the Morrison victory. He spoke for 20 minutes about strategic vision, relationship management, and the importance of understanding client needs rather than pushing product features. "This Morrison deal represents everything Dataflow stands for. he said with a kind of passionate sincerity that made you forget he was reading from talking points I'd written in my reports. It's the result of strategic thinking, persistent relationship building, and understanding that we're not just selling software, we're solving business problems. He talked about the months of research, the custom presentations, the breakthrough insight about corporate culture rather than technical limitations. He described the closing presentation, the follow-up meetings, the final negotiations that had secured additional value beyond the original scope. Everything he said was accurate. He just neglected to mention that I'd done all of it while he attended occasional meetings and provided minimal input. I want to especially thank Lysander Cross for his support during this process, Caspian said, gesturing toward me with magnanimous appreciation. Lysander's attention to detail and client communication skills were invaluable in bringing this deal home. Support, communication skills. As if I'd been his assistant rather than the architect of the entire strategy. The applause that followed felt like mockery. My colleagues were congratulating me for being a good helper while my boss accepted credit for 8 months of my strategic thinking and relationship building. After the meeting, Caspian pulled me aside with a small gift bag from his office. I wanted to give you something to show my appreciation for your hard work on Morrison, he said, handing me the bag with ceremony that felt rehearsed. Inside was a $50 Amazon gift card and a note that read, "Thank you for your dedication and teamwork. Your contributions to this success are appreciated. Caspian, $50. For a $3.2 million deal that would earn him a commission of over $300,000. I hope you understand how much this victory means to the company," Caspian continued. "Your role in supporting the strategic development really made the difference." I looked at this man who'd just stolen credit for the biggest professional achievement of my career and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. Anger is hot and impulsive. This was something more calculating. "Thank you," I said, holding up the gift card. "This means a lot." "You've earned it," he replied with a kind of sincere smile that made me understand I was dealing with someone who genuinely believed his own fiction. That evening, I sat in my apartment, reviewing every email, every report, every communication I'd had with Caspian during the Morrison process. What I found was a masterclass in strategic credit theft. Caspian had been careful never to claim direct responsibility for specific strategies or insights. Instead, he'd positioned himself as the leader who'd guided the overall approach, made the key decisions, and provided a strategic vision that made success possible. My detailed reports had become his strategic thinking. My relationship building had become his client management. My breakthrough insights had become his innovative solutions. Most damaging, he'd been sharing selective information with our CEO and the board of directors, framing the Morrison win as validation of his leadership approach and strategic vision for the company. I could have confronted him directly, demanded recognition for my actual contributions, maybe even filed a complaint with HR about commission theft. But I realized something more interesting. Caspian's success with Morrison was entirely dependent on my continued involvement. He didn't actually understand the strategy I'd developed. He couldn't replicate the relationships I'd built. He had no idea how to maintain the client satisfaction that would be crucial for contract renewals and expansions. So instead of fighting for credit I'd never receive, I decided to see what would happen if I stopped compensating for his incompetence. My first attempt at revenge was clumsy and immediate. I tried to expose Caspian's lack of involvement by documenting the disparity between his claims and his actual contributions. I compiled emails showing that I'd initiated every major strategic decision. I created timelines proving that his input had been minimal and reactive rather than strategic and proactive. When I presented this evidence to our HR director, the response was exactly what I should have expected. "Lysander, I understand you feel your contributions weren't properly recognized," she said after reviewing my documentation. "But management structures mean that individual contributors work under the guidance of their supervisors. Caspian's role was to provide strategic oversight and ensure successful outcomes. But he didn't provide strategic oversight," I argued. "He attended meetings and approved strategies I'd already developed." "That's still leadership," she replied patiently. "Knowing when to let talented team members execute their strengths is an important management skill." I was written up for inappropriate challenges to management authority and told that my attitude toward supervision was becoming a performance concern. My second attempt was more strategic, but equally unsuccessful. I tried to build allies among other sales representatives who'd experienced similar credit theft from Caspian. Surely I wasn't the only person who'd noticed his pattern of claiming other people's successes. What I discovered was that most of my colleagues already knew exactly who Caspian was. They just didn't care enough to risk their jobs fighting about it. As long as they received decent commissions and avoided being blamed for failures, they were content to let him take whatever credit he wanted. "Look, Lysander," said Marcus Webb, our most senior rep, "we all know Caspian's a credit thief, but he's also the guy who shields us from the CEO's worst impulses and fights for our commission rates. Pick your battles." This was a $3.2 million deal. I said, "The biggest in company history. Doesn't that matter?" "It matters," Marcus replied. "But fighting it publicly just makes you look like a sore loser. Take the win, bank your commission, and move on to the next deal." Except I hadn't received a meaningful commission. Caspian had restructured the Morrison deal as a strategic account managed at the director level, which meant standard sales commissions didn't apply. My compensation was my regular salary plus the $50 gift card. When I pointed this out, Marcus gave me a look of genuine sympathy mixed with resignation. "Then you got screwed," he said, "but you still can't fight it without looking unprofessional. Caspian's too smart to leave obvious evidence of deliberate theft." That conversation taught me something important. Everyone knew Caspian was a fraud, but the system was designed to protect fraudulent managers from individual contributors who couldn't prove their cases definitively. So I stopped trying to prove my case and started documenting Caspian's inevitable failures instead. The beauty of Caspian's Morrison strategy was that it was completely unsustainable. He'd taken credit for work he didn't understand, relationships he hadn't built, and strategic thinking he couldn't replicate. As long as I continued managing the account, he looked brilliant. The moment I stepped back, his incompetence would become impossible to hide. I began implementing what I privately called strategic withdrawal. Not sabotage. That would have been too obvious and potentially illegal. Just the gradual removal of the expertise that had been making Caspian look competent. When Elena Rodriguez called with questions about implementation timelines, I told her to discuss scheduling concerns with Caspian directly since he was a strategic lead on the account. When her technical team needed clarification about integration requirements, I referred them to Caspian for strategic guidance. When Morrison's operations managers had concerns about change management during the software transition, I suggested they raise those issues with Caspian since he was a relationship owner who best understood their corporate culture. Every request of my input was politely redirected to the person who claimed credit for my work. The results were immediate and devastating. Caspian's first direct conversation with Elena about implementation challenges lasted 15 minutes and ended with her asking if there had been changes in account management since the contract signing. He couldn't answer her technical questions, didn't understand the corporate culture issues we'd spent months addressing, and had no strategic framework for handling problems he'd never anticipated. His second conversation with Morrison's technical team was worse. They asked for specific details about the integration strategy he'd supposedly developed, and he gave them generic responses that demonstrated he'd never actually read the custom documentation I created for their system. By the third week of strategic withdrawal, Elena called our CEO directly to express concerns about Dataflow's ability to deliver on commitments made during the sales process. "There seems to be a disconnect between the strategic vision presented to us and the implementation support we're receiving," she told CEO Patricia Williams during a conversation I learned about later. "We're wondering if we need to reconsider our timeline or bring in additional consulting support." Patricia called Caspian into her office the same day. I didn't witness that conversation, but I heard through office gossip that it involved significant concerns about account management and client satisfaction. The next morning, Caspian appeared at my desk with an expression I'd never seen before. Desperation disguised as collaboration. "Lysander, I want to make sure we're maximizing your expertise on the Morrison implementation," he said with careful enthusiasm. "Your technical knowledge and client relationships are crucial for ensuring their success." "I thought you were handling the strategic oversight," I replied innocently. "I don't want to step on your leadership approach." "Of course, I'll maintain strategic direction," he said quickly. "But I want to make sure you're fully utilized in the areas where you can add the most value." "Which areas specifically?" "Well, the technical integration, the relationship management, the day-to-day problem solving, the implementation details that require your specific expertise." He was asking me to resume doing all the actual work while he continued claiming credit for strategic leadership. The same arrangement as before, but now with the added humiliation of begging for my help after I'd already proven he was incompetent without me. "I'm happy to support the account," I said, "but I want to make sure we're clear about roles and responsibilities. Maybe we should document who's handling what so there's no confusion." The panic that flashed across his face was beautiful. Documentation meant accountability. Accountability meant he'd have to either admit his limitations or take responsibility for specific outcomes he couldn't deliver. I don't think we need formal documentation, he said carefully. We work well together. Let's just focus on making Morrison successful. Absolutely, I agreed. Morrison's success is the most important thing. But I didn't resume my previous level of involvement. Instead, I provided exactly the minimal support necessary to prevent the relationship from completely collapsing while ensuring that Caspian's incompetence remained visible to anyone paying attention. Over the next 3 months, the Morrison implementation became a case study in the difference between sales promises and delivery reality. Technical problems that I could have solved in hours took weeks because Caspian couldn't identify the root causes. Relationship issues that required understanding Morrison's corporate culture escalated to senior management because Caspian tried to handle them with generic customer service approaches. Most damaging, Morrison's satisfaction scores plummeted from the extremely high ratings they'd given during the sales process to barely acceptable levels during implementation. Elena Rodriguez's quarterly review with our CEO was devastating for Caspian's reputation. We're disappointed with the gap between the strategic vision presented during sales and the actual implementation support we received, she told Patricia during a call I was asked to join for technical clarification. Can you be more specific about the challenges you're experiencing? Patricia asked. The person who sold us the solution clearly understood our business and had innovative approaches to our operational challenges. The person managing implementation seems to be reading from a generic playbook and doesn't understand the customizations we discussed. Patricia looked at Caspian, then at me. Lysander, you were involved in the sales process. What's your perspective on the implementation challenges Elena is describing? It was a moment I'd been waiting for. The opportunity to either save Caspian by resuming responsibility for his failures, or let him face the consequences of taking credit for work he couldn't sustain. Elena, could you be more specific about which aspects of the original strategy aren't being implemented as promised? I asked. She spent 15 minutes detailing problems that stemmed directly from Caspian's inability to understand the custom approach I developed. Integration delays caused by his generic solutions to specific problems. Communication breakdowns caused by his failure to understand Morrison's internal politics. Strategic confusion caused by his attempts to modify approaches he'd never actually designed. These all sound like issues that should be addressed at the strategic level, I said after she finished. Caspian, how do you want to handle the disconnect between our original approach and current implementation? Caspian spent 10 minutes giving non-answers that demonstrated he didn't understand either the original strategy or the current problems. Elena's frustration was obvious to everyone on the call. Patricia's expression grew more concerned with each vague response. Perhaps we should schedule a separate meeting to discuss implementation strategies, Patricia said finally. Elena, thank you for bringing these concerns to our attention. We'll address them immediately and get back to you with a clear action plan. After Elena ended the call, Patricia turned to Caspian with the kind of controlled anger that meant someone's job was in danger. Caspian, I need you to explain to me how we went from the most successful sales process in company history to an implementation that's threatening our biggest client relationship. There have been some unexpected technical challenges, he said, falling back on the generic excuses that had worked. We could rely on my expertise to solve actual problems. Integration projects always have complications that are difficult to anticipate during sales. Elena specifically mentioned strategic disconnects, not technical problems, Patricia replied. She said the person managing implementation doesn't understand the approach that was promised during sales. Implementation always requires some adaptation of the original strategy, Caspian said desperately. We're working through the adjustments needed to meet their operational requirements. Patricia looked at me. Lysander, you developed the original strategy Elena mentioned. What's your assessment of the implementation challenges? This was it. The moment when I could either save Caspian's career by taking responsibility for problems I hadn't created, or let him face the consequences of his own incompetence. Patricia, the original strategy was based on 8 months of research into Morrison's specific operational culture and technical requirements. I said carefully, successful implementation requires understanding not just what we propose, but why those specific approaches were necessary for their environment. And does our current implementation reflect that understanding? I looked at Caspian, who was staring at me with desperate pleading in his eyes. He knew I was about to decide his professional fate. I think that's a question Caspian should answer, I said. He's been managing the strategic direction of the implementation. Caspian tried to salvage the situation with more generic responses about adaptation and flexibility. But Patricia had heard enough. She ended the meeting with instructions for Caspian to provide a detailed action plan for addressing Morrison's concerns within 48 hours. 2 days later, Caspian appeared at my desk again, this time with complete desperation replacing his usual confidence. "Lysander, I need your help," he said quietly. "Patricia wants a comprehensive strategy for fixing the Morrison implementation, and I can't deliver it without your input." "What kind of input do you need?" "Everything. The technical solutions, the relationship management, the communication strategies. I need you to develop the entire action plan." He was asking me to save him from the consequences of taking credit for work he'd never understood, to write the strategy that would restore his reputation, while he continued claiming leadership of accounts I actually managed. "That sounds like a significant strategic development project," I said. "What kind of recognition and compensation would be appropriate for that level of contribution?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, if I'm developing comprehensive strategies that restore client relationships and save the company's biggest contract, that seems like work that deserves formal acknowledgement and appropriate compensation." Caspian's face went white. He understood exactly what I was offering. I'd save his job, but only if he publicly acknowledged my actual contributions and provided the recognition he'd stolen during the original Morrison deal. "I can't restructure commission agreements retroactively," he said desperately, "but I can make sure your contributions are properly recognized going forward." "How specifically?" "I'll make sure Patricia understands your role in developing the Morrison solutions. I'll recommend you for promotion opportunities. I'll ensure your contributions are highlighted in performance reviews." All promises he could easily break once the immediate crisis passed. All commitments that depended on his good faith rather than formal agreements. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I think you're better positioned to handle the strategic challenges. You understand the original vision better than anyone." The look of betrayal on his face was beautiful. After months of taking credit for my work, he finally understood what it felt like to be abandoned by someone whose expertise he'd been exploiting. Caspian's action plan, submitted 48 hours later, was a disaster of generic solutions and strategic confusion that demonstrated he had no understanding of Morrison's specific requirements or the custom approach I developed. Patricia's response was swift and decisive. Caspian was removed from a Morrison account and placed on performance improvement plan. I was asked to take over implementation management temporarily, while the company evaluated leadership changes in the sales department. Elena Rodriguez's relief when I resumed direct involvement was immediate and obvious. "Lysander, thank God," she said during our first call after transition. "We were starting to think data flow had replaced everyone who understood our business with people reading from scripts." "I'm sorry for confusion during transition," I said. "Let me address each of the implementation concerns you raised and get us back on track." Within 2 weeks, the Morrison implementation was not only back on schedule, but ahead of it. Elena's satisfaction scores returned to the extremely high levels they'd maintained during the original sales process. Morrison's technical team started referring to our project as a model for how vendor relationships should work. But I wasn't finished with Caspian yet. While I was fixing the Morrison relationship, I was also documenting every aspect of Caspian's incompetence for Patricia and the board of directors, not through complaints or accusations, but through detailed reports about the problems I'd inherited and the solutions required to address them. Each report implicitly demonstrated that the strategic vision Caspian had claimed credit for was actually a collection of specific technical and relationship management approaches that required deep understanding to implement successfully. More damaging, I began having conversations with other clients Caspian managed, offering support for any implementation challenges they might be experiencing. What I discovered was a pattern of promises he couldn't deliver and strategic confusion that other account managers had been quietly cleaning up. 3 months after taking over Morrison, I was promoted to Senior Sales Director, with responsibility for strategic accounts and oversight of implementation quality across all major deals. Caspian was transferred to Inside Sales, handling small accounts that required minimal strategic thinking and no long-term relationship management. The final devastation came 6 months later when Morrison Industries expanded their data flow contract by $2.1 million, specifically requesting that I manage the additional implementation personally. We've learned that the right vendor relationship can transform how we think about technology partnerships, Elena told Patricia during the expansion announcement. Lysander's approach isn't just about software. It's about understanding our business well enough to solve problems we didn't know we had. Patricia used Elena's comments as a case study for our annual sales conference, highlighting the importance of strategic thinking and relationship building in creating sustainable client partnerships. She never mentioned Caspian's name during the presentation, but everyone in the room understood that my success with Morrison represented a stark contrast to his failure with the same account. Today, 2 years later, I manage a portfolio of strategic accounts worth over $15 million annually. I've been promoted twice and earned more than Caspian's peak salary. My commission from the Morrison expansion alone was larger than his entire annual compensation. Caspian still works at Dataflow, handling small accounts and earning roughly 40% of his former income. His reputation in the industry is damaged beyond repair. Word spreads quickly about sales directors who can't deliver on their promises. We pass each other in the hallway occasionally, and he nods with the careful politeness of someone who knows exactly what I'm capable of when someone tries to steal credit for my work. The most satisfying part isn't his professional destruction. It's the understanding that I didn't actually destroy him. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own incompetence. Caspian destroyed himself by taking credit for work he couldn't sustain and relationships he couldn't maintain. I just made sure he had to face those consequences without my expertise to hide behind. Some people call it revenge. I call it accountability. The difference is that revenge implies cruelty for its own sake. What I did was simply refuse to enable someone who'd been exploiting my work while stealing credit for my achievements. Caspian thought he could take everything I had built and make it his own through clever positioning and strategic credit theft. He was wrong about my willingness to let him continue stealing from me. And he was wrong about his ability to succeed without the expertise he'd been taking credit for. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's just stepping back and letting someone face the natural consequences of their own choices. The $50 gift card is still in my desk drawer, unopened. I keep it as a reminder that some people will always see your contributions as less valuable than their need for credit. But I also keep it as a reminder that those people are only as powerful as you allow them to be. The moment you stop compensating for their incompetence, they reveal exactly who they are to everyone watching. And once that revelation happens, no amount of positioning or credit theft can save them from themselves.